Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our webinar, 5 Things You Need to Know About Financial Transparency. With us today are Ian Kalin, Socrata Director of Open Data, and Ari Hoffman, Socrata Senior Advisor. They will be sharing their insights into open data and financial transparency. Ari, I will hand things over to you.
Welcome everyone to this webinar. I think this is going to be a wonderful opportunity to discuss in greater detail the newly released white paper, 5 Things You Need to Know About Financial Transparency, which focuses on the importance of financial transparency and why it needs to be the public sector's next open data priority. If you haven't had a chance to do so already, the white paper is available at no cost on the Socrata.com homepage, so definitely check it out. Again, I'm really excited about this webinar. Financial transparency is a personal and professional passion of mine. I'm honored to serve as a senior advisor at Socrata, working on developing a financial transparency suite of applications like open budget and open expenditures. I previously served as the Deputy Comptroller of New York City and had the opportunity of spearheading the financial transparency initiatives in the Big Apple, specifically the checkbooknyc.com website, which I'm proud to say is considered by US PIRG the best in the country. And before I introduce my good friend and colleague Ian Kalin, I want to tell folks a little about today's webinar format. So I'm going to introduce Ian in a moment, and then we'll kick off the webinar with a conversation about the white paper for about 10 or 15 minutes or so. And there'll then be a Q&A period where participants will have an opportunity to ask questions, but we want to make sure this is as collaborative and participatory as possible. So if you have a question during the conversation, feel free to use the chat function, and we'll do our best to allow you to join the conversation and respond. So again, I'm delighted to be joined today by a real thought leader in the area of open data and financial transparency, Ian Kalin. Ian, can you tell us a little about your professional background and say hello to folks?
Well, certainly. Hello, everyone. So, Ari, thank you so much for that introduction. I am excited to see what kind of questions come in about this good topic of money and information. My professional background is a bit diverse. I was in the U.S. Navy. I had the privilege of being a clean tech entrepreneur in the San Francisco Bay Area. Also had the honor of serving the president as one of the White House Presidential Innovation Fellows, basically working within the federal government to liberate data and make it open for people to use, give it back to the taxpayers that paid for it. But ultimately, we were really trying to spur a new economy. How could megabytes lead to jobs? How could we help governments be more transparent and accountable to their citizens, and ultimately support the innovative products and services that are built on top of data as a fuel? After my time at the White House, I dabbled a bit in some other aspects of the tech sector in San Francisco, and I've been with Socrata now for just over a year, supporting over 150 governments, mostly U.S. cities, but really increasingly throughout the world, helping these many government organizations to do exactly the same thing that I was doing in previous roles, using data to get stuff done, using data to be more accountable and transparent to citizens and stakeholders, and ultimately driving this new data economy.
Thank you so much, Ian. And again, we're delighted to have you, and I'm delighted to have this conversation with you. Let's jump right into it. You know, we hear the terms a lot, open data. We hear the term financial transparency. What do they really mean? What do those terms mean? What should people be thinking about when they hear those words?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would say that open data is not new. It's as old as the first library in human civilization. Public money being pulled together in a centralized location to put information under one house. So that's been around since the first city ever on the planet. What's fun now is that the change in scale has become a change in kind. Cloud computing has become cheaper. It's easier to access information in new businesses and new models. There's the onset of innovative products like the many that exist in our everyday lives: Google, Apple, Amazon, whatever. So those types of tools are changing the conversation, making it easier for us to get information, almost to the point where there's so much we don't even know what to deal with and what to work with on a daily basis. So that's open data. It basically is all this new information that is both an opportunity but also difficult, especially for government organizations that are trying to make sense of it and use it for. So that's open data, but what does it mean for financial transparency? The data and the information on money, that's always a funny one. People, I joke sometimes, people are funny about money. It is interesting to see how important it is for people to know how their money is being spent. In this larger cultural, national movement for information that people can use, there is a very, very popular, completely natural human desire to know how your money is being spent. I mean, we do this in our own lives. You look at your checkbook, you look at your credit card bills, you're like, did I even pay for that? How much did I pay for that? We do this in our own lives, right? But increasingly we're realizing, wait a second, our tax dollars are going to our government. How are our governments spending my money? Are they spending the money the way I want them to? Are the ways we spend the money reflective of my personal values? Is it reflective of perhaps another person's opinion of how we should be spending money? And that basic human need, that human desire for information and what I would call personal accountability is being translated on a whole new scale today. People want to know how their governments are spending their money. And if they feel it's their, and perhaps it should be. Ari, you did this as a public servant. To a large extent, I would say it's their natural right to know how their money is being spent. Now, if they disagree with how the money is being spent, that's where things get really interesting. But at a basic core, that's what open data is all about. That's what it means for in the government sector to have a financially transparent platform.
That's great. I also think it's real interesting that you spoke about how the concept of open data is not new, and in fact existed before computers existed.
Right.
And I would argue that the term financial transparency, while the term may be relatively new in the English language, the concept is not. And in fact, the founding fathers, when they initially got together and were talking about a system of taxes, I mean, I know that, there are historical accounts about the tensions that took place there, and a lot of the tensions were about how do we know how our money is being spent. So it's a real American topic. It's not a new topic, but I guess with the tools and technologies that we have today, we're able to do it on a scale really unimaginable just a few years ago.
Right, absolutely.
So, Ian, what do you think governments, organizations should be, why should they really care about financial transparency? Yes, there are the tools to do it, but why bother?
Yeah, it's a good question. All right, well, I'll start by saying every good public servant knows that they are in the business of serving their citizens, serving their constituents. So the number one reason why they should care is because their citizens care. And their citizens care because, as I mentioned, they want to know how their money is being spent. But there's also a basic aspect of their own expectation for how governments should function. Again, aspects of their personal lives. They're asking, how is it? It's so easy for me to be able to check my bank account online. Why can't I check the government's bank account online? How are the checks being spent? And there's different ways in which that's being used. A lot of people want to stay informed. They want to understand how new homes are being invested in, how streets are being repaired, how schools are being supported, whether at a larger county and state and national level, how are we taking care of our senior citizens? All these basic questions exist. If governments are in that business, then the citizens care about it. Well, that's just customer service. So you care about customer service, that's one reason why government should prioritize this. On the other side, this kind of not the user necessarily as the individual, people in their homes, but as the managers, the stewards of this information. Government leaders should also care because it's a tremendous opportunity for efficiency improvements. There are ways in which information can be shared today that are drastically ineffective, inefficient, burdensome, and chances are they probably don't like doing it in the first place. A lot of photocopies are being made all across America right now, and a lot of information is being put in spots that no one's ever going to see them. And while it's fine, perhaps, in terms of public disclosure, and there's a lot of even laws about that. A lot of government leaders that may be signed on today will know terms like FOIA or Freedom of Information Act or sunshine laws or things like that, basically mandatory requirements to disclose stuff. But in those processes, there's usually tremendous inefficiencies. And to find a way to do that better, faster, cheaper makes employees of government organizations happier. It makes the citizens happier who are trying to get that information in the first place. You see a greater degree of collaboration with the journalists and the university systems and the nonprofits that are ultimately, and many times, translating this raw, dirty data into real, insights. A lot of this information is inherently complex. I mean, if anyone's really spent time to look through a city's budget, it's not simple, and maybe it's not supposed to be, right? And so there usually is this translation layer that some people that get involved to actually make sense of some of this information. And again, as you mentioned, there's a lot of great ways now to do that in an easier way. So oh, sorry, please.
So you mentioned the Freedom of Information Act here in the Big Apple where I'm sitting. I know you're on the West Coast right now. The city faces enormous costs from what we call FOIL, but essentially the same thing, Freedom of Information Law requests. How can financial transparency save government money in that area? What would be the example?
Well, there's lots of examples. So we have lots of different ways that people measure the time spent on sharing this information. You can see thousands of dollars in staff time per request for a couple of state agencies. In Utah, there's some examples of Oakland, who is collaborating with a number of local nonprofits and also Socrata to get their what they call record track, or basically public records that are requested from local agencies out to the people that are asking for them. There's an example from the U.S. Department of Energy where a number of highly paid and well-paid, well-deserved researchers were making photocopies, and these super smart PhDs wanted to do science, but instead they were making photocopies. But if they were able to, lo and behold, liberate that information through a web-based programmatic interface, they were able to go back to the science they wanted to do, and the U.S. Department of Energy was able to claim $1 million worth of savings in the first year alone, just from not being forced to make photocopies and CD-ROMs. And so those are, so that's a couple of a city, a state, and a federal example of how this is real money. This is real money being spent on things that ultimately is not that effective. And if there's a better way to share this information, such as financial data, then you're ultimately making things better for everybody.
Yeah, no, thank you. Those were really some great cost-saving examples. Thanks for sharing them with us. I want to piggyback on what you just said and share a framework with folks for thinking about cost savings, which I developed when I worked for New York City. If you think about it, if you take a step back, I would argue that while the cost savings from efficiency is certainly material, the most material cost savings is also one that's most difficult to quantify, which is the savings from human psychology. And let me explain that a bit. Simply put, when people like government officials and contractors and subcontractors know that their financial decisions are going to be in the public domain for review and scrutiny, they make better decisions. Time and again, psychology experiments have demonstrated that being watched impacts behavior. So while it's really difficult to quantify the cost savings stemming from making fewer bad decisions, since you're basically trying to quantify what did not happen. I think there is a way to ballpark those savings. Let's take the city of Boston, for example, Ian, and you know they're a new open budget customer. The budget of Boston approaches $3 billion. Now let's do some quick math together here. Say the good people in Boston were able to save 1% of their budget by making fewer poor decisions. Well, 1% of $3 billion is $30 million. That's a lot of money. If that sounds too high, let's say they were only able to save 0.1% of their budget by making better decisions. That would still be $3 million. So I think that most people would agree that governments could save at least 0.1% of their budget by investing in financial transparency. And, you know, there are a lot of ways to save money, and I think it's important to understand that some are more quantifiable than others, but all of the ways that we save money are real and are material. And at a time when governments, you know, continue to look for ways to spend scarce public funds more efficiently, I think financial transparency is a real smart strategy for governments to look at.
Excellent. I mean, I completely agree. I'm playing with the numbers a bit myself. You know, it's funny when you talk about government budgets, it does feel a lot like the business budgets. You just need to add 3 or 6 more zeros at the end of them.
Exactly.
90% improvements have a real impact, and it should. That's the responsibility of government.
Absolutely. So, Ian, tell us a little about, in your mind, who benefits from financial transparency? Let's say a government does move forward. Who are the beneficiaries of these policies and of these initiatives?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think to make it really specific, I'd like to share some examples of who is piloting these types of innovations now, and that may help to make it more concrete. So if you were to go, and because these are the Google is too, I guess, or Bing, or your preferred search for that. So Montgomery County is one of my favorites in terms of financial transparency and what it's doing for people. So if you were to Google Montgomery County, Maryland, you know, budget or open data or open spend, you probably will find it. And hopefully it's showing up on the screen, but you know what, whatever, we'll send the link afterwards. So what Montgomery County is doing with their innovative, did you hit the share button? All right, well, we're just going to keep talking here while the moderators help us out. What Montgomery County is doing is they are sharing their basically checkbook. They're showing their budget for the operating budget and the capital budget, and they're showing how the money is being spent. Through an interactive platform, I'm just going to, on my own screen, click transportation. You can drill down to see how the money is being spent and basically on what. In terms of roadway related to maintenance, parking operations, financial management. I would say that to answer your question, Ari, you know, who benefits from this? Oftentimes, it's usually other folks within government. It's the people who are trying to get this information from the tax department or the transportation department or the budget office, and they actually probably need that information to do long-term planning, policy analysis. They're getting phone calls from the, you know, legislators, or, you know, local stakeholder groups, and this is regular information that they otherwise would need, but even within government, it's kind of hard to get it. It's kind of hard, at least even if you can get it, it may not be as detailed or granular or illustrative enough to actually make sense of it.
Yeah,
I'm going to jump in. Yes.
I'm going to jump in here for 1 second, Ian. First of all, I want to let you know that I can see Budget Montgomery right now on my screen, so I suspect that our participants can as well. And I'll tell you firsthand from the work I did in New York City that it is clear to me, it wasn't clear to me when we started down the road of financial transparency, but once we stood up a beta website and future iterations of that website, a tremendous amount of the traffic and of users came from within government. And yes, many governments, or all governments by now, have large financial accounting systems, most of them proprietary in nature, but they're also complicated to use, and not everyone has the skills to use it. And to some extent, I think the financial transparency websites that government builds for taxpayers, you're 100% right. They're also used internally by government.
Excellent. Yeah. And to your previous point about efficiencies and cost savings, that's another one of those intangibles, but you know when you see it. You know when all of a sudden you can get more stuff done in the same amount of time. So that's one beneficiary. I will confess, although this is kind of perhaps a more provocative aspect of budget transparency, public transparency. In previous jobs, previous roles, I was selling to government agencies. So if I'm a company and I'm curious to know how much basically the long-term investment capital plan is of the government, that basically became a business development pipeline. I was looking to say, well, lo and behold, San Francisco is going to be spending $20 gazillion on this one project in this area. I guess that's, they're going to probably put out an RFP in the next couple of years. And so, that's, now there's different examples of that. Again, I don't want to burden Bryant and Patrick too much on the kind of improvised web demo that we're going through here. But I live in San Francisco, and San Francisco has something called SF Open Book. You can just as easily Google SF Open Book. But that shows down to the vendor how much money is being spent by the city and county on specific projects. And so if you click on budget here, Patrick or Bryant, at the top of the screen, you can just kind of see through it. You'll see examples of individual vendors. Just yesterday, I was at the San Francisco State University, and I had a number of people ask me, hey, I'm trying to compare vendors to see really for a student project if there's a pattern of corruption. I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. Now, if you're the mayor, I don't know if you want students to be looking into that, but perhaps that's kind of the basic aspect of the way this stuff goes. Now, well, I've got every faith and confidence that there is no criminal or corrupt activities taking place, but to even just check how your money is being spent, that's the expectation of citizens. They want to at least be able to see where it's going. And so this is the kind of diverse and complicated but fun and empowering ecosystem that is increasingly being demanded by citizens. It's helping government employees get stuff done just faster and easier, and ultimately it's helping the government leaders to make really informed decisions with their communities about how should their money be spent.
That's great. Look, the scenario you just described in San Francisco basically empowers citizens to be citizen auditors. And allows them to really look through the books in a way that just really wasn't possible beforehand without doing things by paper and going down to the finance division of the city of San Francisco. Now you can do this whenever and wherever you want, and there certainly are, I know from New York City's experience, there are journalists, there are advocates, there are lots of people inside and outside of government really looking through the numbers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, I would say that ultimately what makes that relationship more collaborative versus combative is the data. If you only show the one pie chart, it's going to be very, very hard to have any productive conversation. But in Montgomery County's example and here in San Francisco, they don't just show the pie chart or the pretty illustration. They let you drill in. Now, not everyone's going to care about that necessarily, and that's fine. Sometimes you just want, hey, rough numbers, help me understand this thing. Sometimes, though, and particularly for those of us that have worked in the financial sector for some time, we know that there are super users out there. And there are folks that are ultimately going to be our strongest advocates to actually make sense of this information and work together on it. And those individuals would like to be able to do more than just see the pie chart on the PDF file, which is fine, a good place to start. They want to be able to drill in. And that's really the foundation of this new open data economy, is that the context needs to be provided, the links need to be available, there has to be a help button, there has to be a suggest a data set, request some help button, right, on the website. That's what makes this a more productive conversation.
That's great. Thank you. Those are really some compelling points, Ian. I want to take a step back for a moment and expand on the importance of financial transparency, sort of put it in context by referring to a recent study by Pew Research, which shows that trust in government is at an all-time low. According to this study, just 19% of Americans say they trust the government to do what's right, which is down from a high of 73% in 1958. A recent Gallup poll found that American taxpayers, get this, American taxpayers believe that 51 cents of every dollar that goes to the federal government is wasted. And while taxpayers have a slightly better opinion of their state and local governments, it's by no means favorable. That same survey, the same Gallup poll, found that taxpayers believe that state government wastes 42 cents on the dollar and that local government wastes 38 cents on the dollar. And I think, Ian, that one of the reasons taxpayers believe there is so much waste in government is they have little understanding of how government spends their hard-earned money, and if governments and advocates like folks on the phone are serious about rebuilding the trust with the public and dispelling the myths about the magnitude of wasteful spending, and of course there is wasteful spending, but it's not at the 51 cents on the dollar level, then, you know, if we want to dispel those myths, if we want to rebuild trust, we really need to invest in financial transparency so that taxpayers really know how their money is being spent and don't feel like it's being, it goes into some big black hole of waste and disappears. And I think if we do that, folks are going to start thinking about financial transparency not as an IT expense, but as a strategic investment in democracy, because there's nothing more fundamental than having trust in government. So I just kind of wanted to share that thought.
While we get a few questions teed up, maybe, Ari, I can ask the first one. So our webinar and the white paper is titled 5 Things You Need to Know About Financial Transparency. So maybe, Ari, I can ask the first question. What are the 5 things?
Yeah, so there are many areas that the paper covers, and I actually think that it would probably be worth, and we covered many of them already, but one of the things that I think it would be helpful to look at is the last item, which is how do you address the naysayers who say this is a waste of time, this is a waste of resources, we can't justify the spending, we're just too small to do this. I think that would be an interesting conversation to have while folks propose their questions, and let me try to jump into that. Look, when I started working on financial transparency 4 or 5 years ago in New York City, there wasn't a lot out there. So our decision wasn't a build or buy decision, it was more of a build or we ain't going to have it decision. And it wound up costing us $3 million in taxpayer money, and I believe it was a good investment, but certainly $3 million is too large of an investment for many, many governments, and I'm sure for some folks on the phone. But one of the great things today about Socrata's product offering is that the barriers to entry are so low. Now, for the first time, governments can really be financially transparent, could provide the user experience that you shared with us from Montgomery County a few minutes ago, Ian, at real affordable cost. And that's very exciting and a real opportunity that even the smallest of governments could leverage.
Any insights in terms of, actually 2 questions now. Oh, now they're really coming in. Okay. First question, well, let's go out of order. How much information is too much, Ari?
That's a great question, and I do want to be sensitive to people's schedules, so we will wrap up within the next 5 minutes or so. You have my promise on that. How much information is too much information? New York City's budget is $70 billion, and New York City has millions upon millions of disbursements every year, checks or electronic transfers of funds to vendors. I don't think that any amount of information is insurmountable. I think the challenge, Ian, is how do we present it in a user-friendly way? Obviously, having one massive spreadsheet with millions of rows is too much information. But can you provide summary-level information in a user-friendly way that allows those super users, as you refer to them, to access the information on a more granular level if they so choose? I think that's the approach. That's the approach, and that's the challenge that we have with financial transparency.
Yeah, it's like you have to serve like different customers. There's like the high level, but you got to let the pro-ams and the professionals dig in deeper. Another question coming in, I'll quickly answer it. Other than San Francisco, New York, and Montgomery County, could you provide us with a few examples of local governments that are leaders in financial transparency? I'll give a couple more of my favorites, Chicago and Boston. Now, these are primarily U.S. cities, but I think they're some of the best examples of what's actually happening. Chicago's fun, not just because they provide all of their underlying information. They also have a summary, what I'll call open performance. They have performance metrics, objectives, goals. And in their finance metrics, they give their own, basically, report card of themselves, and then also allow you to drill into aspects of the financial transparency. And so, cityofchicago.org, or if you, again, were to do a web search for open data, performance metrics, Chicago, you're going to find some really interesting ways in which they're not just giving the raw data, but giving the metrics and then the summary reports on top of that. So hopefully that answers that question. Here's another one coming in. Ari, this one's to you. How will the new Data Transparency Act, the federal level, impact financial transparency throughout the nation?
That's a great question. I'm really excited about that. We all know that usaspending.gov is a federal website that has been around for quite some time. The Sunlight Foundation and others, I think, have rightfully argued that it is incomplete at best and inaccurate in many instances. The Data Act really seeks to set standards and requirements across the federal government, across the agencies, and bring some order to the chaos. And I think that within a few years, the Data Act is going to prove that you could take a couple $1 trillion in expenditures and present it in a user-friendly to the masses in a way that was really unimaginable before. And I think that the federal government is going to really assume a leadership position, and they're going to establish some best practices that state and local governments are going to be able to draw upon in the months and years ahead. So I want to be sensitive to people's schedules here. We had a really great conversation, and Ian, I thank you for your insights and your thought leadership. Are there any closing remarks that you would like to make before we wrap up?
I don't have any closing remarks, but it looks like there's at least one more question. Well, I mean, let me just put it this way. As a wrap up, again, thank you so much, Ari, for your service to the city of New York and helping us understand how to navigate this stuff. Maybe, Ari, you could speak to the white paper one more time.
Sure. Look, it was a pleasure having everyone on this webinar, and if you haven't had a chance to check out the white paper, which is really the impetus of this webinar, visit Socrata.com, and there is a link to 5 things you need to know about financial transparency. It's available at no cost. And we look forward to being in touch with folks. Feel free to reach out to Ian and myself, or Twitter, or by email, and continue this conversation. But again, thank you so much for joining us. We hope this was a meaningful conversation and informative conversation, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. Thanks again, Ian. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.